Hello. Hope everybody's doing well today. Welcome to one of Pink Elephant's webinar series, The Yellow Brick Road and the Effective Organizational Change Manager. My name's Robin Heisick. I am a management consultant with Pink Elephant. I have been teaching our organizational change management courses for close to a year now. I do have background in organizational change management as a practitioner, as well as a master's degree that I have in organizational development. I find the subject quite interesting, and hopefully you'll find it as interesting as well. Before we get started, what I'd like to do is suggest that there are places for you to let me know if you're having any challenges with the recording or with the slides. And you could do that through the chat window that you should have visible to you. Also, we can take questions and answers at the end of the session. I will make sure that there is time so that we can go through any questions and answer. Please feel free to add in any questions as we go along, and we will answer them as we go. So there's already a question in chat. Is there a call-in number? I have an event number and host key. I actually need to find that out. If somebody's there from Pink Elephant and could help me, please, if you could, in the chat window to everybody, put the call-in number in, and we will get that to you pretty soon. It will be in the chat window to you fairly soon. Okay, so that being said, we will get the call-in number, and if you're okay, we will then start on our way. Before we get started, I want to tell you that we are going to be talking about organizational change management, which is very much a multi-discipline profession and a growing profession. So as we go through slides, I have so many things I want to tell you that we could be here for hours. I'm going to give you some key information or some select information. I'm also going to be referencing different authors, different researchers, different experts in change management, as well as some of the books that they have written. I have not put together a list of books for you. I do want to tell you right away, though, that everything that I reference, even if there is another book with it, is referenced out of a book called The Effective Change Manager's Handbook, Essential Guidance to Change Management Body of Knowledge. What I've found out is that there's a voice over IP only for WebEx. Not sure what to do about that for the person who asked about a call-in number. Hopefully you can get, well, if you need a call-in number, you probably can't hear me to begin with. But hopefully you can listen to a recording after the fact, or you can find a way to get in through voice over IP. Okay, so let's get on our way. We do have an agenda. So I want to first talk about what the research tells us in relation to organizational change and the ability for organizations to be successful in their change initiatives. Then going into how do we get started with our change initiative, our change project, and then talk about 4 different areas that are important in the context of change. First of all, that change is about people, individuals. So we'll talk about what changes can mean to individuals. And then change happens within organizations, and particularly within the culture of organizations. So we'll talk a little bit about what does that mean. As we start to understand the nature of the change, then how are we going to address the different people that are going to be impacted by our change or perceived to be impacted by our change? And therefore, how do we identify and engage stakeholders? And change is about communication. Communication from selling the notion of our change all the way through to communication about what people need to do differently, what they need to learn, what kind of things are expected from them. And then we'll wrap up a little bit of our content with change management practice. So some of the elements of looking at change, looking at teams within change, and then finally a little bit about certification. So the research tells us that many projects fail to achieve the results that are expected. This does not mean that projects fail. Many projects succeed in what they're being measured against, and many projects will end with a party for all of the people involved in the project. But what this is saying here is that a project can succeed and yet not achieve the expected value. So this number, 70 to 80%, is a number that is stated here from 2007. The challenge that I see is this number hasn't really changed any time throughout the years that I've been involved in organizational change management. So from a Wizard of Oz perspective, what do we do if we have monkeys that come in and are hurting us or taking away and flying away with the change perspective that we want to achieve? Let's talk about projects for a minute. So what are projects, and why might projects fail to achieve the expected value? Projects have different deliverables, if you will, or different components. Many projects, or all projects, have some form of a project output. The project output is the deliverable, what we are trying to achieve, oftentimes where we got the funding for the change that we want to make. The deliverable, though, enables some form of outcome. So what are we expecting to achieve because of the deliverable that's put in place? And then the ultimate goal is that when we do something different, a project to create a new organization, a project to put in an ERP system, a project to change where we are currently working from one headquarter location to another, a project to implement or adopt IT service management principles. So any kind of project should have an outcome as well as benefits. Now, when we look at projects and the deliverable are always measured by three things. In project management, this is often called the iron triangle. Those three things have actually tension between one another, but typically this is what the project manager is being measured on and is focusing on during the project itself. And so what is the schedule or timeline? Are we within budget that's been allocated, and what is the quality of the deliverable? This is where I had said earlier, we could look at many, many projects that are quite successful in that they delivered something that fell within those three components. However, the outcome, the benefits and goals, they're not so much about the thing that we deliver. What they are looking at is how people are absorbing or adapting to whatever the new thing is that we need them to adapt to. This is where projects do oftentimes not get the value that is expected. That oftentimes comes after the deliverable, after the party, after the project team it disassembles and goes on to a next project. Change managers leading change is needed through the entire project life cycle. Where change management differs from project management is that the change managers need to look at the project all the way through achievement of benefits and goals, as well as sustaining the new behaviors or the new tasks that we need people to do in an ongoing lifespan. Let's just take an example here. If we wanted to have a project that delivers a brand new web interface for our customers to use, the deliverable or the output is the technology that drives that web interface as well as the user user experience, actually the UI, the user part of that. The outcome that we want to achieve in having that new website is that we now maybe can have customers find out information about us or even order from us because that website exists. And benefits and goals, if we do this well, if we have our marketing done well, if we have an easy-to-use website, if we have the proper training with that, is that we increase our exposure, we increase our brand, we increase maybe our revenue because we've added this different mode. All right, so enough about that. The key thing here is change management, is living through this entire project life cycle, including the parts that come after the deliverable is put in place. So where do we start? We need to start by clearly defining the change. Now, it's pretty easy for Dorothy that we could define the change. She wants to go from where she is back home. If you look at her, she wants to go from color picture back to black and white picture. How easy is it for us to define the change? We're really good at identifying the deliverable in a project, but starting very early within the project planning, maybe from the very outset, what change do we expect to happen? What new behaviors do people need to take on? What new culture needs to change in our organization? Can we align what those are with our strategy, our organizational strategy? In other words, not change for the sake of change, but change so that we could have a positive impact on the goals of our organization. What are drivers for the change? Why is it important that we make this change? Changes are disruptive to people, to business. What are we going to get in terms of value for doing this? What is the vision for change, and to make sure that we all agree on this very clear definition of what is change. In addition to what is change, what are the benefits that we expect to achieve from the change? And so from benefits, we've got the good witch over on the right, and we have the wicked witch. So there's benefits and disbenefits is where they fall in. We need to make sure that we identify and understand all of them. We need to do this at the outset of a change project, because what we're doing is, A, deciding what those benefits are that we will use to help sell why the change is necessary, but also help us measure, did we achieve those benefits when we have delivered the new technology, the new organization, the new whatever it is, and people have gotten on board and gone through the adjustments or the adoption that they need to make. Okay, so that's the big part of getting started. Now, when we think about change, we need about where are changes impacting our organization. All changes are going to impact individuals. When we talk about individuals, it is the person who might come across as resisting our change. It might be the person who's saying, yes, bring it on. What we need to do is understand people and understand how people might perceive the change to impact them, or even the reality of change impacting them, and understand how we can help them through this process. With change in the individual, there are all kinds of books, all kinds of researchers, all kinds of disciplines again, psychology, behavioral sciences, leadership that we could borrow from. We're going to talk about just two different authors of change and looking at change in individuals. We're going to start by talking about Bridges. This is William Bridges. His book is called Managing Transition. And transition is actually the key word here. All this time, or at least so far, I've been talking about change. Change, as far as William Bridges is concerned, and we should be concerned as well, is that the event that happens. It is when we roll out the new website. It is when we move into our new corporate headquarters. It is when we announce a new organization. That's the change. people need to go through transition. Transition is the psychological process that each individual goes through uniquely because of the change that we're going to put in place. In Bridges' world, he talks about 3 different phases of transition. Again, 3 different phases that each individual needs to make to get on board and get through an emotional process to get to the new state, the new way of being. The first he calls endings. Endings is letting go of what we know today. And it could be just the skills that I know, but it could also be how I identify myself. If we're changing tools, let's say, and I'm the one who brought in the existing tool, and I'm the hero because people know, go to me when something needs to be done with this tool, I might have a very negative reaction when we say, oh, we're going to get rid of that tool, we'll bring in a new tool. So again, that's my identity that is being threatened because of this particular change. As people begin to let go, as people begin to get through the shock of change or the denial of change, they enter the next phase. Now, this is not necessarily sequential like I'm saying. It's a roller coaster that people go through, and you see the blurred lines. You could go back and forth through these different phases. But staying with me so that we could go through and teach you what this is. The neutral zone is an in-between time. It's a time where I have said, okay, I'm on board, let's go with this, and yet I'm not fully engaged with, or the new practices I'm not fully aware of or able to demonstrate the new practices that I'm going to need to do whatever is different, whatever has come along as a result of our change. This in-between time could be really weird for me, really stressful for me. So it's almost like being on a tightrope, or actually a trapeze, where I let go of one and I'm not quite to the other yet, and I'm not quite sure if I'm going to get there. I'm not back to that safety zone. Hopefully, if managed well, people might also see this as a time of opportunity. So I'm not quite knowledgeable of what's happening in my future, and yet maybe I can find ways to get involved, to participate, and to find something that will be useful for me. The final phase, the beginnings or new beginnings, is now when it's become a way of working. The new way is my way of working now. I've almost even forgot about the old way, and now I'm again grounded in whatever that new thing is. Again, everybody goes through this in an individual pattern. You see, you've got the lion, you've got the Tin Man, you've got the Scarecrow, you've got Dorothy. Each of them have different needs, and each of them have different responses to the change of, follow me, I'm off to the yellow brick road. In terms of transition, William Bridges gives us advice. And so I'm assuming that you are leading change in your organization or hope to be leading change in your organization. And so there are different ways that people, whether they be leaders in the organization or whether they be leaders of change, and you could be, by leader earlier I meant executive, versus someone who's got the personality and the influence to lead change. Through the endings, we can help people let go of the old ways. A lot of this centers around clarity, describing what will be different, describing what won't change, making sure that we are acknowledging that people have losses. So it's not saying that we're going to sympathize. It's not saying that the changes are going to happen, but it is empathizing with people that losses are real to them, regardless on what we feel about those losses, if we feel that they're big or small. They're big to the person who's experiencing this. Identify reasons why we can't continue to work as we are. Why can't we stay the same? And communicate, communicate, communicate. Through the neutral zone, it's really good to try to give people a safety net. And that safety net is giving them ways to connect with other people who are going through the same transition so they don't feel that they're out there by themselves. look for different ways that they can get feedback, even if it's temporary feedback. Come to this office on Fridays to have discussions during this transition period, as well as even looking at different ways that people might be measured during this change period, or this transition period, so that they do have the opportunity to learn what they need to learn new, as well as keep up with their current work, so that they are not, trying to force themselves in deciding what path to take when something comes up. With New Beginnings is involvement, giving people people are saying, okay, I'm on board now, I'm ready, what could I do? Give them a part to play. Give them a very clear picture of what the new world will look like, as well as what is the path to get there. Make sure that they have a purpose in this new world. And as we're doing this, it's up to the people who are leading the change to be consistent in their behavior. And so in everything that a leader will do, what they say it, how they make decisions, who they tap on the shoulder to get involved, all of that is demonstrating their commitment to the change, and people are watching, clearly watching. Make sure that we communicate early success to reassure people, and make sure we celebrate both the small iterations as we go through, as well as the big party at the end. One thing that you could look at and describing this in a little bit of a different way is looking at something called the Beckert and Harris change formula. There's actually other names for this as well, but basically it's the same message that we get across. As we're looking for people to get on board with us, as we're looking for people to jump in and say, yes, I'm ready to make this change, we need to understand really three things. What is their current level of dissatisfaction with the status quo? How unhappy are they with the way they're working today, or the conditions that are presented today? If people are pretty happy with the way things are working today, it's not likely that they're going to jump on board and want to be part of a new way of working in the future. If they're complaining and they're not happy, well, maybe we have them then. Maybe they are more likely to want to listen to a better way that we hope to make for them down the road. The second thing is, how desirable is the proposed change to people, to an individual? And maybe it would be desirable, but they don't really know about it. So how can we influence people by communicating, by showing them that the better way is truly a better way for them, and increasing their desirability of going to the new state? And then finally, how easy is it for me to get from the old way to the new way? What's the practicality of the change? Do I know I have 3 easy steps? Go to training, set up a new ID, start going. Or is it difficult for me to get to the new way of doing things? These 3 things together are providing tension, again, within them. But as people who are leading changes, it helps us understand first where people are coming from, and then in knowing that, what we could do to help them proceed through the change. One of the things that's a challenge for many change initiatives is the purple box, practicality of the change. Oftentimes we are lax, or we are slow in identifying a clear path to the future and making sure that people are aware of it. The better we are at that, the better people will decide themselves that they want to be involved. All right, so that was just a little about people and needing to work with people to get them to want to be part of this change initiative. Change also has a big play with the organization. And with the organization, oftentimes we are changing what we do, and a lot of those times those changes affect the culture of the organization. When we're talking about changing the culture of the organization, we might have a very clear uphill road to go because, again, it's what people are used to, even if they don't like it. Sometimes people find that as part of their comfort zone. Now, what you see are two models here, Lewin's 3-stage model, Kotter's 8-step model. There are many, many books. There are many, many models or philosophies on change and looking at change within organizations or teams, regardless of the size or the scope of that organization. One of the things that I have observed is that regardless of the philosophy, the model, the framework that you use, they all boil down to really understanding the first, Lewin's 3-stage model. It's foundational to a lot of the others, as well as some, if not all, of the points in Kotter's 8-step model. So let's go through those, and then we'll talk about what makes a good change sponsor or a good person helping to lead that change. Lewin's 3-stage model comes from his work way back in, actually this is 1951, but actually even earlier than that. And Lewin's work is really tied to culture, so deeply rooted cultures within populations, so not even just tied to an organization. What Lewin has said is that first, before we can proceed with our change, we need to break inertia. People, and this is you, this is me, we just have a natural tendency to be comfortable with or be in our comfort zone with the way we do things today. Even if it's not the best way of doing things, or sometimes it might seem a little bit hard to do things in the current way, again, it's our comfort zone, and breaking out of that typically means some unknown, some ambiguity, and often with fear. So before we could change again, we need to break that inertia and make sure that we are breaking down these existing habits. To do that, Kurt Lewin says, define the current situation, create a vision of the desired end state, and identify forces that are trying to keep us in equilibrium with our current world. Forces that could drive the change forward, such as if we don't develop this website, we will lose sales to competition, and forces that will resist or push back on the ability to change, such as it's going to cost money, it's going to cause us to have to go to training, people might lose jobs. So these are together, again, tension that is keeping the momentum or keeping the way we do it today. Then we make the change. The change is now embedded in your project and what we're delivering. And then we need to go through the element of refreeze. And refreezing is developing new culture, new mindset, new habits, and making sure that they are well established in each individual, and that we have mechanisms that are ongoing to sustain the new way of working. It is so easy, even if you've been working in a mode for a good period of time, that when something comes up, maybe tension occurs, to go back to the old way of doing what you had done before. Very tempting. Okay, so that's Lewin. Kotter has come along with an 8-step model. Hopefully you've heard of John Kotter before. John Kotter has multiple books out. His 8-step model was first brought to us in the book called Leading Change. John Kotter's 8-step model is well used and used for all kinds of different changes. Sometimes I wonder about John Kotter being a little bit, maybe not misused, but, well, misused, in that we talk about the first step, establish a sense of urgency, and yet we really haven't applied what does urgency mean when we're looking at our change. So let's walk through and just talk about what John Kotter meant with this. In step 1, establish a sense of urgency really means that It is so urgent that we make this change for our organization, for our department, for our group, that bad things, really bad things, will happen if we don't do it. In terms of organizations, that we will lose market share, or that we will not achieve the revenue that we need to achieve. In terms of departments, the sense of urgency that, if we look at IT, maybe we'll be outsourced if we don't get this done. And so urgent means urgent, and everyone at a management level and many people in the organization need to truly believe in this urgency for us to be successful. Once we've established the sense of urgency, we need to create the guiding coalition. So where is the group of people that will help guide the change, that believe in the sense of urgency and have the influence to help guide the change or the transition or transformation through the organization? Getting that people together to build a vision and strategy for the change so that we could talk about the change and show meaning of the change and the urgency for change to anybody, any stakeholder of this change initiative. Communicate that over and over. It's not once and done. So going through these steps, they aren't necessarily one time. Communicate, communicate, communicate. Empower broad-based action means breaking down the barriers, breaking down the walls. What needs to happen for people to get on board? Do people need training? Do we need to look at management maybe that's not on board with our change and do something about that to break down that barrier for certain employees to get involved? What are those things that are in the way? Create short-term wins. And so we talk about that as short-term. Sometimes we talk about it as low-hanging fruit. That's not necessarily the case. It's what are those things that we couldn't put in place while this entire change or transition is going on to give people a reason to believe, to bring visibility to the potential for the new way of working. And then when we've created those short-term wins, let's not give up. Sometimes we do that. We see some wins in place and then we go, oh, this is tiring, this is exhausting, we're done. No, no, no. Consolidate those gains, produce more change, keep going, because change, especially if we're looking at larger transformations, is an iterative, ongoing, cumulative process. And then finally, refreeze. That tying back to the Kurt Lewin. Anchor the new approaches in the culture, refreeze, make sure that we've got the methods in place to sustain that change. Now, what we need for change is a good sponsor, a good leader. We need executives who are bought into the change, or if it's a change within a department, we need the head of that department to be bought into the change. 10 different characteristics of a good sponsor coming from research by an organization called ProSci. A good sponsor should be able to articulate a clear vision and how that vision links to the organizational strategy. Hopefully we've got a lot of that we've been building along the way through our change initiative, even starting when we started with our first couple of slides defining what that change is. A good sponsor gets commitment and involvement of senior and line management. So we make sure that our peers are on board with this change and are walking the talk as we are as well. Championing the changes and maintaining that sense of urgency. If there's a sense of urgency that is just for this week and is not urgent after that, well then, was that truly a sense of urgency? How do we keep the visibility of that urgency high? Challenge resistance and make sure we've got a clear path for success. And so if we tie back to John Kotter, that will be empowering that broad-based action. How can we break down the barriers? Be a role model. As leaders, and this is the sponsor as well as the senior and line management, how are we going to walk the talk and make sure that we are presenting a good role model for people who we need to be on board with us with the change? Communicate, 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 and that doesn't mean communicate like the Wizard of Oz that stands behind the curtain. This is getting in front of the curtain and being very present in our communications. Make sure that people who are part of our change, our people who are our guiding coalition, our line managers, our senior management, have the training that they need, the coaching that they need to be able to listen to people, to influence people, to coach other people. So the soft skills that people need to help others through the transition. Make sure that there's the right resources, there's people, time, money, which is not just for that project deliverable, but for the ongoing needs of the project that get into training, that get into ways of sustaining the change. Make sure that we are looking at reward systems or how people are measured. We need to align reward systems with the new way of behaving. People do what they are measured against, and so we can't use outdated reward systems in our new environment. And then make sure we know what's going on in the organization. What other changes are going on? What other initiatives are going on in the organization that are either complementary and should be part of our change initiative or are competing with the resources, timeline, schedule, events that we need for our change. ProSci says, and I will say to you as well, the greatest contributor to overall change management success is ongoing, active, and visible executive sponsorship. Okay, so that's just a little bit about change in organizations. Obviously, there's a lot more than that, but what we could achieve in the little bit of time we have together. So we're going to go on and we'll talk about stakeholders, we'll talk about communication. Most project management disciplines, no, I'll backtrack on that. All project management disciplines, among their checklist of things to do is to identify stakeholders. My challenge with that is that oftentimes within a project, it is a one-time task. We identify the stakeholders, we put that in our project charter, and we move on. You're going to find pretty soon 7 principles of stakeholder engagement that will suggest that that might not be enough. We might need to look at stakeholders over and over again because some will wane off and some will be added as we go through a change management initiative. And then communication, well, we'll talk about communicating and communicating effectively. We just have one slide to talk about with the principles of stakeholder engagement. I don't have this on the slide, but these principles come from a man by the name of Mayfield, Patrick Mayfield, and he's written actually numerous books in that he talks about these different principles. So the first 3 of our 7 principles talk about identifying and segmenting stakeholders. In this case, we're not going to tell you how. There are many ways in how to do this. We're just going to talk about these principles of principle number 1. You can forget important stakeholders, but they won't forget you. So hopefully you've not been caught within a project where a stakeholder just pops up, especially at a meeting, and says, well, what about me? Or starts to derail your plans because they weren't part of the initial communications or the initial tasks that need to happen. So again, because we can't forget stakeholders, principle 2 comes into play. Identification is a continuous practice. Again, it's not once and done. New stakeholders emerge, old ones can fade away, and when we talk about stakeholders, these could be internal to our organization, external to our organization. They could be suppliers, so they could be really anyone who feels impacted or is impacted by our change, positively or negatively. The third principle is with identification, what we want to understand is a priority of stakeholders. How do we segment or group stakeholders so that we know which we have to spend the most time with at a given point in our change and which might might benefit from more simple, let's say, communications. And again, we're doing this repeatedly through our change initiative as those priorities are going to change over time as well. Once we have identified our stakeholders and we've grouped or segmented our stakeholders, then we have 4 more principles that talk about how do we relate to them, how do we mobilize them or engage them so that they will be on board with our change. Principle number 4 says some stakeholders are best engaged by others. So are there people who are maybe in their peer group who have already gone through the change or transition who can influence those that might be on the fence on whether they want to get on board or not? Number 5, seek first to understand and then be understood. So this really gets to not going into to a person or into a team or into a meeting and saying, this is what I think, this is my solution. This is saying start first with listening to other people and understanding where they are. What are their pain points? What would make them happier in their job or in their work or in whatever the change is about? Emotion trumps reason. And so how can we appeal to people's emotional side versus stating the 10 facts that are in a spreadsheet about the change that we want to make? And demonstration trumps argument. If we have pilots, if we have models, if we have working prototypes that people can see, that we can demonstrate, that's a lot better than a PowerPoint presentation. Okay, and then work. There we go. All right. Communicating change effectively. So we know our stakeholder groups. How do we communicate effectively? Well, it's not from behind the curtain. I think I used behind the curtain before. We need to communicate in a people-focused approach to communication. I think that's easily understood by saying, in terms of communications, how would I feel if I'm communicated in this way? If I'm feeling that I'm attended to, if I'm feeling that this is more people-focused, then others probably will as well, and that could help in terms of testing. Is this a good way to communicate or not? Within people-focused, there are different factors that we could do, different things that we could do. A lot of this is common sense, not necessarily common practice. So factors, don't wait until full information is available. And we do that oftentimes. Oh, I don't know the answers to these questions, so I won't say anything until I do. What's happening when we leave these gaps of communication is that people are making it up. They are creating their own truth, oftentimes going down a negative path. It's just, again, human nature, what we do. So fill in those gaps with what we know. It's certainly okay if asked a question to say, I don't know, but I will get back to you within whatever time frame. Focus on two-way communication. Certainly an email blast is good for a period of time, but we need to follow up with communicating people face-to-face and making sure that we are understanding and listening to what their needs are and how they're reacting to this change. Tying right in with consider the impacts of changes to individuals. So that goes hand in hand with bridges and the transition that people need to make. Make sure that we target audiences. Instead of communicating everything to everybody, how do we target audiences? Making sure we allow plenty of time for people to absorb the communication, understand what it means to them, and then be ready to express their needs. And then encourage feedback. And of course, with feedback, we also need to act on it. What do we need to do because of the feedback? Some cases, maybe it's a better solution that we can incorporate into our planning. Talking about planning, with communication, we don't want to just start by sending out emails or setting up meetings. We should have a plan, starting with a communication strategy that is going to set out the overall objectives for our communication, and then taking that strategy down a step and developing the plan of activities, whether it be newsletters, whether it be training, whether it be face-to-face, whether it be lunch and learns, whatever that communication plan will be, carry out those activities and then measure the effectiveness. Don't take for granted that our communication has been absorbed or heard, or even if it's reading, read. When we look at communication and measuring, I actually love this quote. It came from someone who was in one of my classes. Well, it actually came from George Bernard Shaw, but it was stated by a person in one of my classes. The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place. We send out the email, we expect everybody will get out of it what we think we stated in the email and are taken back when we find that that's not true. So measure, measure, measure. All right, change management practice, the last of the topics, of the 4 topics about change management, looking at stakeholders again and what does the change mean to them? What's the impact on a particular group of people or segment of people because of our change? Looking at it, and you could use any kind of risk management process that you have, but at a simplistic level, not simple, simplistic level, what is a high-level impact assessment? So what's the level of impact for people who are in this group versus this group versus this group? Helps us understand where there's groups with higher impact and address their needs first. Then taking that down a step for that particular group and saying, well, what are the specific impacts to them? They need training. Their organization structure is going to change. They will no longer have the manager that they had today, whatever those are. Analyze those impacts, validate the impacts to make sure that we have discovered everything that we could, and through validation and maybe through a pilot, validate the impacts to make sure we haven't missed anything. Assess the severity of the impacts and prioritize our mitigation strategies to help people through this change. Change management is kind of really changing what we're saying here. Change management is working with other people. So far we've talked about a number of different things someone with change management needs to know. They need to know about individuals. They need to know about organizations. They need to know about engagement. They need to know about measurement systems. It's really a team that needs to work together, not just one person. And so what mechanisms can we put in place to quickly build a good team, a good, effective team? These are elements from authors by the name of Glazer and Glazer. And what they're saying is the team must know its purpose. What's the mission? Why are we pulled together? What's the urgency? What can we deliver to them in terms of information that we already know? What are our specific roles? A lot of times we come to teams, we don't know why we're there, why we were sent there, what are we supposed to do? How can we clarify that? How do we operate? When do we meet? How do we make decisions? How do we manage interpersonal relationships? When teams get together, there's oftentimes tension when people are coming from different parts of the organization, or when they might be testing some assumptions of why we're together and who's doing what. How do we manage that? And how do we manage our relationship with other teams? Oftentimes, very good, productive teams get to be more insulated and become a we-they with other teams where there might be dependencies. How do we make sure that we take care of that so it doesn't happen and we are able to work across teams? When we talk about change and change teams, we talk about change agent networks. So getting people from across the organization that will help us present the change to their particular parts of the organization, as well as be a foot in both sides, or both camps, if you will, their organization that they're coming from, as well as the change team or the change initiative. So within our change agent networks, we get dedicated people with that information flow. We've got people across the organization to bring perspective of the different parts of the organization and helping us understand the change impact to those different parts as well as what will work well. How can we tailor our solution so that we've got a better solution for the entire organization? Sometimes we've got a lot of people who want to be involved. A change agent network maybe make it more manageable size by having somebody who's representing each of the different groups. Hopefully we've got the right person, and that person feels like they are they can influence the team that they came from, and that team feels that they've got their backs, that they're one of us. Helping with the knowledge coming from the teams, from the different parts of the organization, and becoming experts about the new ways of working to help embed those back into their organization throughout the change initiative or when the time comes. All right, my little clicker. As we produce change, book that some of you maybe will have read is The Tipping Point. So we've got the whole level of adoption and going through, hopefully we eventually get enough people on board, enough people performing the new activities, adapting to the change, creating the new habits, that the initiative or the swaying of other people to get on board has actually created an unstoppable momentum. We could relax a little bit, doesn't mean relax totally, and let that momentum carry the change throughout the organization and people just then naturally getting on board. And then, clicker, finally we talk about that whole sustaining change. So going back to Kotter and making it stick in the organization, how do we do this over a long period of time, sometimes after the deliverable has actually taken place? Make sure communications are well timed to the events that are taking place. Make sure that we have a phased approach to implementation so that we can see those short-term wins along the way. Keep the visibility of the change high, which we could be saying and having graphics or newsletters or banners or cupcakes that say 200 people have now changed, 500 people have now changed, making sure that people are seeing progress along the way. And lastly, getting help. Having managers help with delivering the change or influencing the people within their organization to make sure that change takes place and sticks. All right, so that was fairly quick. Went through a number of topics. There's a lot more. Again, change management is a growing discipline. It's a discipline that borrows from all kinds of different sources. I told you the name of the book, Change Manager's Handbook, that you can get more information, as well as taking classes. If you're interested in classes, you can look for Change Management Foundation and Practitioner courses that come from Pink Elephant on www.pinkelephant.com website. Also, there are organizations today, Change Management Institute and the Association for Change Management Professionals, that have professional designations requiring that you have had education, so a knowledge component, as well as experience in the change management field. You can achieve the knowledge component from the two courses that are listed above, and the experience from all of the time that you've already spent or will be spending on change initiatives in your organization. All right, thank you for attending. My name again is Robin Heisig. You can reach me at r.heisig@pinkelephant.com. I hope that you have learned a bit about change management in the little bit of time that we've had together. And my hope for you is that you've learned enough that you want to learn more. Go out and research, read books, try out what we've talked about. Just take different pieces of the change management and see how it works for you and your organization, and then build on it as you go through. Enjoy your journey. I don't see any questions. I'll hang on for a little bit if there are any, and if not, enjoy your day.